Hello, good morning, folks. This is Bob Reid. I'm a principal with Spiezle Architectural Group, and thank you for joining us. Let me introduce the other folks that are here in the presentation. Tim Fish, who is, unfortunately, we do not have his photo here right now, but well, actually, let me put up the presentation and you can see it there. So we're going to have, actually, let me go back for a second. So we're going to have 4 grand challenge topics that we're going to be asking questions of the panel. And then after each of those 4 questions, there's going to be audience dialogue. So if you have questions, please put it in chat. So we'll have a decent amount of time here for discussion and response back. And if we don't get to your questions, we will follow up after the event with responses. So who we have here is Tim Fish, founder and president of Two Chair Studio, a strategy and design firm supporting purpose-driven schools. Previously, he served as the first chief innovation officer at the National Association of Independent Schools and hosted the New View EDU podcast, bringing a systems-level view of innovation, governance, and change management in schools. We also have Howard Glasser, academic technology integrationist at George School, a Quaker institution. Howard's collaborating with teachers to design and implement technology-rich lessons. His background spans teaching physics, math, science education, and educational technology at both high school and college levels, with a strong focus on practical and classroom-level integration of emerging tools. Arudis Foster, interim dean, professor, School of Education at Drexel University. Arudis is interim dean and tenured full professor of learning sciences and technologies in the School of Education at Drexel University. He leads efforts in academic research and organizational transformation with the emphasis on equity, innovation, and evidence-based practices. As a learning scientist, Dr. Foster's research explores how technology learning environments such as games, simulations, augmented virtual reality, and AI-enabled systems enhance learners' knowledge, motivation, identity, exploration, particularly in STEM. Brian Holtz Brian is the founder of an educational architect of the Drew School, a new kind of school experience on the campus of Drew University in Madison, New Jersey. He brings a school startup, whole school redesign perspective to how AI, curriculum, and structure can be woven together from the ground up. Chris Lehman. Chris is founding principal and CEO of the Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia. A network of inquiry-driven, project-based, one-on-one schools recognized as national models for School 2.0. He's co-author of Building School 2.0, How to Create the Schools We Need, offering a deep practitioner-driven vision of modern, tech-rich, human-centered schooling. Bill Mongan is an associate professor of mathematics and computer science at Ursinus College, founder and principal investigator of the Human Machine Intelligent Systems Lab, and co-director of the Teaching and Learning Institute. He coordinates the college's artificial intelligence minor, bringing higher ed, CS, AI, and human machine systems lens to the conversation. And James Seaman, managing principal at Fielding International, the PhD in educational psychology and educational technology, as well as an architect. James works at the intersection of learning, science, AI, and school design, helping schools create learner-centered, flexible environments that respond to new pedagogies and technologies. So what the pathway today, there's going to be a little bit that I'm talking about, and then generally I want to shut up and have these very smart folks discuss some of the questions that we put up. But why are we on this quest to begin with? So, I'm an architect. We have architects on the call. We are trained to use our eyes and our hands in terms of looking at design. What we think is equally, if not even more important, is our ears in terms of getting to understand who our clients are, what their focus is, how the built environment can help them do what they do better. And that's a big reason why we're here today is really getting an understanding of how AI is affecting education, and then therefore, by extension, how can the built environment do a better job of, or just to do a good job of how do we support those efforts that our educators are working to perfect. Not to say that we're in any way do we have answers today. It's more a matter of having good discussion and coming away with maybe more questions than answers, but understanding that we're all very early on in this process with generative AI's influence on education. So looking at this, in terms of, it's a funny old picture of a classroom, not too dissimilar to maybe some of the classrooms that you may have in some of your own institutions currently. So looking at, another reason why we went down this path is we were working with a prospective client. We're being interviewed for planning and architecture work, and the project was put on hold to renovate a building and to build a new building because they wanted to understand what the influence of AI would have on the curriculum and therefore the building. So that's what caused us to go down this path to look at, really speak to folks all over the country regarding at the higher education and K through 12 levels to understand what are they doing. Is it wise to hold off waiting to understand that influence or not? It's been a very interesting path that we've been taking. James, are you available to talk about the next slide here?
I think so. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Do you see it as well, James?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Bob. Thanks. Yep, thanks. So one of the things that we have been seeing is just the rapid change in technology that has been going through multiple paradigm shifts. And so this is the biggest hurdle that schools are facing today, is that in the past there was only maybe one or two paradigm shifts in a generation. Now this generation is facing 5 different paradigm shifts. And so this makes it so difficult for us to plan and think about, what is the future of school going to be when we're moving through all of this, all of these changes. So it definitely brings some uncertainty, but also we could think of it as opportunity as well. So Bob, on the next slide, one of the things to point out here is that essentially we've gone through 5 different industrial revolutions, and the biggest challenge is that the dominant school design, so how schools are physically designed, which also shapes how they are organized, was really designed during the beginning of the 20th century, so around 1900s. And since then, we've gone through multiple industrial revolutions, but that model has not really changed that much. I know many of the panelists that are on here, some of them lead schools that are very innovative, that have figured out how to do school differently. But in my experience with working with schools all around the world, the dominant model still is this what we call the factory model, or classrooms and corridors, and so it makes it difficult. So when you're building a school, a building lasts for 40, 50 years. And so you're making decisions that are going to have lasting effects. So how can we think about this differently? How do we think about the physical design? Because it has such a huge impact on how schools are organized.
Thanks, James. So today, like, as I said, there's folks from K through 12 and higher education on this call. In this quest that we're on, we've been talking to folks at all levels of education and looking at, because we're all dealing with it at the same time, and looking at what symbiotic relationship can there be? What can higher education teach K-12 in their pathway, and vice versa, K-12 to higher education, understanding that students are at different points in terms of their journey, not just in education, but also in terms of their exposure to technology. And what did COVID do to folks? What did the social media do to folks? So that's why we have folks at all levels here to hopefully benefit each other in this discussion. So in the older folks may understand what movie this is from. I did talk to somebody about AI in my office, and they had no idea when I said, "I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that." So I will state that it's from 2001: A Space Odyssey, when Hal, the computer on the Discovery 1, decided it was not going to let Dave back onto the spaceship. So looking at, it's a scary time, but we also want to see there's exciting things that are opportunities, but not to forget that there's some scary things that you're all dealing with in terms of looking at integration of not just AI, generative AI. There's obviously a lot of other technological concerns, but looking at, today saying that we're looking at, trying to look at the positives, but not to forget the negatives, or the concerns, and those both are going to be discussed today. But ultimately understanding, it's about our students at all levels in terms of what experience do they have, looking at, where are some of the things that maybe we missed the opportunity on in terms of integration of social media. I'm hearing from a lot of folks really looking at what their ethics, what their mission and vision is of their institution, and how do they integrate generative AI into that. So it seems very purposeful from a number of different institutions I talked to across the country, and actually consultants outside of the country as well, in terms of what they're facing. So in terms of topic one, there's going to be 4. Professional capacity and the evolving role of educators is going to be the first topic. And quite honestly, we used AI for the creation of this presentation. So this is interesting from EDUCAUSE in terms of where they're saying the impact on pedagogy, K-12 through higher education. Although I would argue in looking at this, I don't think you could draw that line in between the two. I think many of these things are going to be crossing over in terms of all levels of education as to what are things that we may be able to take advantage of in terms of generative AI, but also what are some things that we have to be concerned about. So then the question to our esteemed panel here is, what new knowledge, skills, and mindsets do educators need to thrive with AI? And how can schools build that capacity in intentional ways? So I had the pleasure of talking with all these folks many times previously, but everyone together. And what was on Friday, and what was great is no one's shy about their opinion, which is fantastic, which is the whole, a lot of smart people. So could I ask someone to start down this path in terms of answering that question?
Bob, I can go ahead and start. This is Brian Holtz from, can you guys hear me?
Yes, thanks, Brian.
Okay, yeah, so in regards to the first question, what new knowledge, skills, and mindsets do educators need to thrive? And I think, so I'm building on a program called Drew School in Madison, New Jersey, and also did a lot of work with the creation of Alpha Schools in Austin, Texas. And I think one of the things we've done at these new age type 21st century school models is we've reimagined the role of the teacher in the classroom, right? Since our curriculum content is delivered via personalized learning pathways through the use of computers, learning apps, since the teacher no longer delivers the content, we're like, okay, how do we utilize this person the best way possible? And we've reimagined the role almost as a learning coach, a learning facilitator, a mentor, or an on-demand tutor, right? So we believe that this connection between independent learning by our students is facilitated and grown by these on-demand coaches providing mentorship, motivation, and emotional support when a kid gets stuck. So it's an opportunity for where we work in these pod groups, right? So you might have one adult that's managing 10 to 15 students in a pod, and then they might go to another pod as a subject matter expert. So there's a lot of floating around of these facilitators. So I think for us, and kind of what we're doing at Drew School, it's around the coaching mindset and helping kids figure out how to learn and utilizing AI almost as a opportunity for deeper learning for those particular students.
Thank you. Other comments here?
Hey, Bob, I'd love to, this is Bill Mongan. I'd love to jump in. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I totally agree with all that. I think I kind of think about what teachers and students need to do in terms of 3 things. They need to be able to utilize the tools that are available to enhance critical and creative thinking skills. And that's both for the educator and for the student. And also to be empowered to scrutinize those tools. We're going to talk a lot about that today, but just broadly to be aware of kind of the shortcomings and limitations of AI systems. What are the data provenance risks? Where are these answers and perspectives coming from? not really different from when we watch a commercial on TV or see a debate, and we think, what is the perspective of that speaker? But, really understanding why is this thing generating what it's generating, and where is that data coming from, and what do I know about it? And the third is to be able to advocate for fair and equitable outcomes when those decisions are made. So we're kind of shifting to a more interpersonal and hyper-personal kind of experience. And so to prepare teachers for that kind of hyper-personalized space, I think about training them to actually use some of these tools beyond like, hey, I'm going to ask chat a question and get an answer, but to really empower them to use these hyper-personalization features, things like something called retrieval augmented generation, which is where you can give a document to an AI system, or imagine an AI that can actually like take advantage of and leverage your own professional development journey and the skills that you bring and the gaps that you have, and to be able to generate based on your unique needs. There are agentic tools that do that, things like Opal from Google and Notebook LM. I think that's also from Google. Not that I'm advocating for Google. There are lots of these, but these are tools that let you basically create as a consumer, no code, no programming, agentic and document-based systems. And so we can actually empower teachers to kind of use these tools at a greater depth than what the average consumer is using today, and actually use that in a teaching and learning context to help them pass those same kinds of augmenting and enhancing skills to their students. So we're going to dig into each of those as we go on today. So I'll kind of leave it there at a high level, but this kind of notion of hyper personalization is something I'm really thinking a lot about, and how we can empower teachers to be the drivers of that new conversation.
Thank you. Please.
Is it Chris or me? Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'd like to chime in here a little bit in terms of new knowledge, skills, and mindsets do educators need. I think good teaching, regardless of the type of technology, requires a good knowledge of how to teach the pedagogy. And when it comes on to technology, how to teach that technology in particular context. And with respect to a little bit deeper in terms of the kind of context, I think the teaching needs to focus on how do you get students to engage in lifelong learning, and that involve interpersonal skills, intrapersonal skills, and transfer. Understanding how to transfer information from one context to the next. We're preparing kids for jobs that we don't know yet exist. Right now we're focused on AI, but we don't know what kind of jobs those are preferred. So how do we get them to engage in developing those skills to transfer? And I think preparing teachers to embody that kind of thinking and embody that kind of mindset is equally important. And part of that is to one, make identity relevant in context and information. Two, center autonomy and agency when teachers are teaching the classroom. And three, elevate what I call prosumer. So moving students from just being consumers of technology to being the producers and consumers. So being able to create. I think Bill Mongan just hit on that a little bit in terms of the creativity part of it. So elevate the prosumer from consumer to creator, basically, especially when it comes onto commercial tech systems. And four, close the loop and reflection. I think a lot of times we don't engage kids in terms of how to be self-reflective, thinking in the moment and then thinking on the moment. So reflection, we call reflection in action and reflection on action. I think that's highly important to become really self-actualized. And those are skills that are needed for lifelong learning. So the content is important, and content will always be king. But I think what goes around that is equally important, so that people can transfer information beyond and prepare for lifelong learning. I think those are the kind of skill set that teachers need to bring to whatever content that they're teaching.
And Chris Lehman, you've founded and been running a project-based learning school for 20 years. So I'm interested in your thoughts in terms of now what AI's influence is or not, in terms of from your perspective of running the school, the Science Leadership Academy.
Yeah, I think the single number one skill that teachers and students are going to need moving forward is the most finely honed bullshit meter ever. I think that we need to be incredibly circumspect here. We have to acknowledge how badly we have gotten ed tech wrong over the last 10 years. This is not just a tool. We have to understand that every teacher and every student has to ask themselves the very hard question of, when am I doing the thinking? When am I outsourcing the thinking? And we should never outsource our thinking, period, full stop. Where there are moments where AI allows us to do some work in a way that we could not do before, that allows a higher level of thinking once this sort of basic work is done, sure. Everything we know right now suggests that is not the way it is getting used. That whether it is at the high school or at the college level, most people are using AI to not have to do their work and their thinking themselves. And we should never, ever outsource our critical thinking, and fundamentally we have to understand that schools are not, we look at product as an avatar for process. And what teachers are going to have to figure out is how to ensure that the learning process remains transparent, visible, and vital. And they don't simply look at the products that kids can create with AI and think that the kid has actually learned anything. This is a dangerous and scary and, quite honestly, dangerous time in education when we are on the precipice of doing profound harm if we don't get smart real fast.
Thank you, Chris. The Howard Glasser, I'm interested with that, with what's been said so far in terms of looking at the George School and what you've told me in the past regarding the a Quaker institution and the work that you're doing with other institutions to try to understand how how to roll this out while still being consistent with your vision and ethics of your institution.
Sure. Thanks, Bob, and morning, everybody. Yeah, there's a lot that's been said that some of which I might echo, some of which I feel differently. I guess to add something maybe different or additional to the perspective, when I think about this question, I think about time for individual educators and schools and educational institutions writ large to really step back to think about what is the purpose of this whole schooling experience. What are our learning goals? I've heard voiced today by people already on the panel about preparing them for jobs or delivery of content or filling gaps that they don't have. I'm not sure that we all perhaps have the same goals, and that might be true within even a single institution. And so I think clarification of what is it that we're trying to actually achieve in our curriculum, through our curriculum, in the student experiences, how do we center the students and think about what it is that we're trying to support them with growth through our system, through our experiences. I think that getting some greater clarity, does AI or how does AI shift some of the purpose of schooling? Does it at all? And does it shift or add to the learning goals that you have as a school, and then sort of step forward from there? So getting that clarity, I think, first is important, and having that be sort of your guiding North Stars and guiding lights going forward.
Thank you. James, do you have anything to add to this question?
I do. Thank you, Bob. First of all, I think everything that's been said so far has been very insightful. I do agree with a lot of it. One of the things that I see just thinking about designing schools is that the skills that teachers need are essentially the same skills that would say that we want students to have. And I would argue that most schools, their vision or mission statements, it's all centered around some sort of flavor of student-centered learning, some sort of, skills, 4 C's, less about content experts, less about, subject-based things. It's more about, these so-called 21st century skills. So one, I would just argue that teachers need to have those same skills that we want in students, and we need to continue to focus on that. But I think one of the things that I've seen, and this is probably partly due to how schools are organized and designed, is that collaboration is such an essential skills for teachers to have. But I think it's a profession that makes it where collaboration skills aren't really developed because teachers typically teach in isolation. That may not be true at some of the schools that I know the panelists are running, but I see a lot of still traditional schools where basically, you teach in isolation. And this, really goes back to, I mean, we've been trying to figure this out way before AI even. And so we talk about how student-centered learning is important. Personalizing learning is so important. We say that AI can help with personalizing learning, but, one of the key things is that, when teachers are teaching in isolation, it makes it very hard to personalize learning for 25, 30 students. But when you work as a team and you collaborate, it makes a lot of difference. And this is, there's research, if you look at Don Lordy's work from 1975, the school teacher, he talked about at that time how, the teaching profession is a very isolated profession. And I see many schools today still where they're still organized in ways that teachers are isolated from one another. So I think as we move into this, new world with AI, but not even just AI, just the world that we all have been talking about with 21st century learning, collaboration is such a key skill that I think isn't developed as much just because of how the profession of school, or just how school is organized. It makes it difficult to practice those skills and develop those skills.
Thanks, James. The Tim Fish, any comments from you? I know that hopefully you can hear us here.
I sure can. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah. So just so honored to be here and listen in on what everyone else has been saying and agree. I think this is a fascinating moment for education. And I think when I think about what classrooms, will need to look like, I think very much the journey that we have been on needs to continue around critical thinking, around engagement, around students doing real work that matters. I believe fundamentally in the power of students to do incredible things. And I think schools can become a place where that power is really unleashed. And I also think that schools are innately human, that we need to really continue to focus on how do we build and sustain community? How do we see the person in the student who is in the space, and how do we engage with that person in meaningful ways? I look to the work of Intended 25 and the work of David Yeager around this idea of sort of how do we really create a mentorship mindset, and how do we stand in that mentor role as teachers? And I think that for me is something that can be really powerful as we go forward, on top of the other things that people have said.
Wonderful. So I'm not, just to remind folks that and I know a number of people may have joined a little later, please put any questions you have in the chat for our panelists. In not seeing any at this point, or just I'll give it a second if anybody wants to type in any questions of the group. And while that's happening, if there's any other retort anyone has, or anything to add further to that to this question. I will move along then. So then, in terms of looking at topic 2, redefining rigor and assessment in the AI world, obviously generative AI, every article you saw 2.5 years ago was about cheating in terms of how AI is going to just ruin us there. What was encouraging was, well, we needed to do things different then our general assessment is not, the historical assessment just doesn't work anymore, which to me was exciting. So looking at here in terms of and again, this is AI giving us some answers. I think it's a little too rosy. Looking at traditional homework, essays, math, in terms of what's happening there, and maybe moving towards project-based learning and oral defenses, which is great to hear if that's truly where the direction's going. And on the higher ed side, looking at shifting from detection, although I'm not hearing everyone doing that. I'm still hearing some people, you got pen and paper, come into the class and do your work there and try to ignore AI, but that's hopefully not the majority. But then looking at in terms of emphasizing critical thinking and originality, which is great. I think we're going to say critical thinking probably 50 times today, understandably. So then looking at, with our panelists here, if AI can do much of what we traditionally called rigorous work in school, how should we rethink rigor, authenticity, and assessment? We go in reverse order? Tim he's in an airport, or going to head to an airport, so he has to head out at 11. So Tim, if I could ask you to start down that path, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that as we think about this notion of really AI and where it's going to be taking us and how we think about it, for me, it's ensuring that I love the way that Chris really put it in this notion of like, we have to be really attuned to be thinking about this BS detector. School that's been doing a lot of really deep thinking on this is Lakeside School in Seattle. And one of the things that I was talking with them recently, and they were talking about how for them, they really are working very hard to have students determine am I using AI in this particular moment to shortcut my learning or to deepen my learning, and to always be asking folks, staff, students, everyone, to be accountable to answer that question in a way where we are very conscious about whether or not we are shortcutting or whether or not we are deepening, and to be in pursuit of deepening, and to be really conscious about not allowing ourselves to be in a place where we're shortcutting our thinking. And so that's just one piece I just wanted to throw out. I'd love to hear what others had to say.
Chris, your name was called.
Okay, I was going to piggyback off of that, but go, Chris. I'll go after Chris.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. I think the other piece of this puzzle we have to understand is that many of the skills that we ask kids to do are sort of dual skills. And for the moment, I'm going to talk about writing, right? And maybe this is the English teacher in me, but we don't want to outsource student writing, right? I mean, there are people out there saying that like kids never have to write an essay anymore, and kids can just have AI do it, and if they write the outline and da 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 da. And again, that is a fundamental misunderstanding of process and product. Yes, AI can kick out a perfectly competent high school essay with a thoughtful prompt. That's not the point. The point of asking kids to write, when you ask kids to write an essay on something, on anything, what they are doing is they are writing neural pathways that allow them to think, right? I mean, to me, one of the most important things we should look at right now is Marianne Wolf's work, Reader Come Home, and how we have to understand that we are helping kids develop their brains, right? This is the intellectual equivalent of sprint work. We write to deepen our thinking. And yes, we should be able to write in such a way so we can communicate to others. And yes, that is an important piece of the puzzle for the standards and da 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 da. But fundamentally, we ask kids to write so they can think about what they think. And we can't outsource that stuff. So on some level, what we need to understand when it comes to AI is we never, just because artificial intelligence can produce something intelligent, it is doing so artificially, right? It's in the name. And what we want are kids who can rigorously and vigorously examine their own thinking, to reflect, to critically analyze, to do all of that work. And you gotta do that work. Like there's no way out but through, right? And right now we are living in a moment where, people are saying, oh, we can have the AI do it. And kids aren't gonna learn if we do. And we've got to be unbelievably thoughtful about understanding that now we have to look at the learning process, and we've got to figure out how to capture process when we assess what kids are doing.
Thanks, Chris. Rudis, you were going to say? Uh,
I,
uh,
I thought Hoda
Yeah.
was going to go speak. That's why.
yes,
So I just want to piggyback on both those two things. I think that, you know, a lot of times when we think of AI, just harking back to some of what Chris was saying, is that we should think of it not just as a tool. And there are different ways to think of technologies. I think one ways we should think of AI in terms of think of it as a partner in cognition. And that partner in cognition should it's basically you're talking about the human, the machine, and the community. Those three things is a triangle coming together. And how do you work within that space when it comes down to assessment? For me, that is thinking of assessment should emphasize metacognitive thinking, actions that supports executive function as such. What does it involve? It means that we should, engage in a process where if we think about the process by which partner and cognition should engage in thinking, acting, and developing. That means assessment should be around those three things. How do we engage people in thinking in terms of executive function, in terms of metacognitive thinking? What kind of actions follow that? And then the development of that person or that student over time in terms of making a lot of things contextual, identity, relevant. So intentionally engaging students in terms of planning, monitoring, self-evaluation, engaging in, as I say, thinking in the moment as well as thinking on the moment. So not just to think in the moment in terms of what am I doing now, but to go back and then self-reflect and say, what did I just do? What changes did I make? And all that should be done within a particular context. I think Howard mentioned that in terms of what is the goal of this particular school? What do we want kids to get in? It's a highly contextualized, highly situational, but deep executive function, metacognitive thinking.
Thank you, Ruse.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and share. Oh,
Good, Howard.
Go ahead.
all right, sure. All right. Yeah, actually, building on several of the comments, I was going to share my take that for me, I'm thinking a lot now about this assessment piece. So typically, or traditionally, I should say, like lots of schools, we've emphasized product as the primary criteria for assessing students. And I think right now with AI, perhaps it's illuminating something that I'd like to think we've thought for a while, that the learning process, as Chris was sharing, the writing process, the thinking process is what we really are very interested in. And one of the ways we've been influenced, I guess, in a lot of the work that I do on Thomas Guskey's work in terms of grading, talk about how grading is often thought about as some amalgamation of product criteria, process criteria, and progress criteria. And again, traditionally, so it's progress, process, and product. The product carried a lot of weight. So the final essay or your solution set or your lab report. That said, like product can be outsourced, and there's a lot of concern with that, to AI. But what we really want, or what I'd argue, is with product being able to be outsourced a bit more there, the process, how are students thinking about analyzing their data? How are they thinking about the writing process? And how can we create instructional moments and assessment opportunities, assessment practices that make visible to us their process, the thinking process that overlaps in different disciplines and different ages?
James, will you have something to say there?
Yeah, sure. So, I just want to start by saying this is definitely not my area of expertise, since I don't run a school. But I have seen a lot. Well, first of all, I want to say I love what everybody's saying about process and how that's so important to show the process. And I do think AI has that potential to show process. I mean, I wonder if teachers just have students, instead of turning in a final product, they turn in their chat log, so that way they can evaluate the conversations that they're having with AI to really evaluate that metacognitive, that thinking that's going into it. Because I think that there's so much that AI can help with to get students and just people in general to think about their thinking. And so just one example I'd like to give is just my own personal experience with using AI and with writing contracts. So I have to write a lot of contracts, architectural contracts. And with AI, I've learned so much more about just the language in architectural contracts than I ever have before, just because I have a tool now that I can play with, that I can use. And I know many of my colleagues that, they do the same thing now. Like, it's just, and so this is the world that these kids are going into, that in professionals, they're using AI to do things, because it's so much easier to do it using AI, because I have a much deeper understanding now of contracts, just because I'm having to interact with AI to do that. I understand what indemnification clauses mean and how to write, really great contracts here. And then another experience I just want to share too is from a student perspective. So we do a lot of, when we're designing schools, a lot of engagement with students. And I had an experience where at an international school where students, before we went in to do our design concept for their school, a group of students had developed what their design that they generated using AI. And it was at a level that I would say that is like a 95% solid solution that they came up with. And a lot of the images that they came up were definitely, they were all AI generated, but it's not that they just, got the output and turned it in. They definitely had to, how they were speaking and presenting to me, they had to have a deep understanding in order to be able to present in that way of all the things that you have to think about when it comes to architectural design. And I haven't seen that before. I've had, where students have showed, kind of projects where they've designed schools, but not at that depth that they understood. So they were definitely using AI to really deeply understand the process and all the things that you have to really understand how buildings work and systems work and things like that. So I think AI can be used to develop deep rigor, because you can ask so many questions and get immediate response. But I think that the challenge for teachers is to develop projects and assignments that allow for that depth, not just regurgitating information and that, but it allows them to really play with the tool to be able to learn, to understand something much deeper, get to that metacognitive level, and then also have that design a project where that process is exposed, where it's through a presentation, where they can have to demonstrate what they've learned, where they turn in either just the chat conversation that they had with an LLM, but being able to design it in ways that really exposes that. But I think it definitely has that power to have some real deep rigor if designed properly.
Thanks, James. Chris?
Yeah, I think we have to be aware of the fact, and we're not talking about this yet, about how these AI bots are being designed, right? If folks aren't listening, by the way, to Your Undivided Attention, which is the podcast at the Center for Humane Technology, founded by Dan Barkay and Tristan Harris, is doing, you need to, because these are folks who are some of the folks who are at the center are folks who literally were designing some of these tools and are now very concerned about their use. The tools are designed to keep us using the tools, and by and large, the critiques that the way that the AI chatbots are being designed right now is through sycophancy. And that's super dangerous. We don't need an AI chatbot to tell students that everything they're doing is great. And by the way, just keep asking me the questions, right? So we have to understand that right now, the business model of these chatbots is such that they are designed to keep kids using the chatbots. And that is super dangerous. In fact, actually, Dan Myers just did a fascinating look. Again, another person, if you're not reading his work, you should be, looking at even when people are saying like, well, no, we designed this tool to be more Socratic in its way and all this stuff. That's not how kids are using it, right? So Conmigo, whether you like it, whether you don't, is the tool that schools more often than not, more than any other AI tool, are pushing. It has almost no adoption among kids. Kids go right back to ChatGPT as the #1 use, and they're using the unsocratic version of it. So we have to understand right now that it's not just the AI potential, it is the fact that the way that these tools are being designed in such a way to keep kids using the tool in super unhealthy ways. And we have 10 years of experience now of learning how badly we got this wrong when we misunderstood the damage the quote algorithm can do to children. And the AI algorithm makes the social media algorithm look like infancy work. So therefore, if we don't start demanding that the way that the kids interact with these tools are not ways that are engaging, that are enticing them to continue to use these tools, we're going to do profound cognitive harm to kids. The capitalist influence on these things are at fundamental conflict with what we want our kids doing in schools. And the research is getting better and better and better at this. It suggests that these tools aren't designed like for the kids.
Thank you, Chris. So in terms of looking at maybe answering a question, I know that in the chat there's some back and forth. Adrian Allen said isn't the problem that we are asking students to do real work to engage in, where getting good answers look pretty relevant. But if education is about developing your brain and thinking process, the need to consult AI is not really important at all. And then Arudis and Chris did respond to that, and I'm interested in other folks on the panel's thoughts on that question.
Yeah, I need to jump in just a second. This is Tim, but one of the things that I've been working on and relating to sort of personal use of AI, because there have been many times when I have used AI to help me synthesize information, do a first draft of writing, be a thought partner, help me explore, has been that, you know, I had my whole career, I'm at the sort of approaching the tail end of my career in some ways, and I had my whole career without AI to develop the ability to write and to think and to be very critical and to sort of do that deep sort of analysis and thinking. And so now AI, I find, just helps me do some things faster. But what if I had never had all those years of doing that deep thinking, right? As I think the situation that our students are in now, how would AI affect me? And I that's what I worry about, is that when you don't have those years of doing it without AI, you tend, I think the developmental whole thing gets kind of messed up in terms of the ability to think deeply. And that's what I am really thinking about. How do we design to ensure that deep thinking still happens?
Tim. Bill, you had your hand up first.
Oh, sure. Thanks. Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'm about to echo what was just said and some things that Chris said earlier. But you know, what it makes me think of a couple of things. One is actually this idea from Vannevar Bush, who was an inventor kind of around the World War II era, and he had published a paper then called "As We May Think." And in that paper, in case you haven't seen this, he talks about this thing called the Memex, which is like a system where he envisioned putting a camera on a miner's cap and using that to actually read scientific papers, like medical papers, because they were proliferating around the time of World War II. Faster than the physicians and the scientists could keep up with it. And so he was sort of postulating, like, what if we could automatically read this stuff and maybe save it to like microfiche, you know, that kind of thing. And then use that to sort of advise the physician, and was pretty clear that it was like not about replacing the physician's knowledge of the science, but sort of pointing them in the right direction. You know, this idea of augmentation rather than replacement came up even then. And I'm struck by how much that kind of describes, I think, a lot of what we're seeing with these generative systems today. And at the core of that is that these AI systems can generate very well within the bubble of its training data, right? So it's trained with this corpus of knowledge, some of it reliable and quite a bit of it not. But it's kind of an open question about whether or not it can actually innovate beyond that bubble. And I think this gets to what Chris talked about a few minutes ago, that that's kind of not the point. I think Adrian's question kind of said that too. Like, that's not really the point. I think the point is that we are asking students to think about how to organize their thoughts, to synthesize background information. Maybe some of it came from AI, but some of it probably came from scholarly sources too. And the way we engage with that is sort of classic ubiquitous skill sets of criticizing knowledge and looking for gaps and synthesizing things and finding the opportunity in prior knowledge. And so these are the kinds of skills I think we should be emphasizing instead. The other thing I think about is the notion from classic teaching and learning of Bloom's taxonomy. So, kind of walking up the ladder from being able to see and understand material. Someone earlier spoke about, like, hey, I learned about like the fundamentals of contract law, by interacting with these tools. Like, it maybe could accelerate some of those lower Bloom, like, knowing what the landscape is and recognizing the terms. But that, and those are fundamental and prerequisite to going up that ladder to synthesizing and applying and critiquing and evaluating that information. And just kind of making sure that that's what's on our mind, is being able to train ourselves and train our students to be able to walk up that ladder using whatever tools, whether it's AI or not, but training them to be the right kind of thinker to walk up that ladder, and really take information and be able to use it to some good that is greater than what they could do by themselves or in the context of a team.
Thanks, Bill. I know Arudis and Howard, you have your hand up just to try to keep us on schedule. I just wanted to comment. Olivia was I think creating not necessarily a question, but just a comment regarding person-to-person discussions. The importance of that. Ed Lorden from Westchester University, professor there, said, let's keep in mind that we not only need teacher perspectives on this, but the student perspective and understanding as well. Unless teachers can get students to understand the practical, ethical, et cetera, components of this, they're flying blind. Just in terms of the last minute or two, in terms of Q&As, anyone have a comment on that in terms of looking at, how do we, like from Chris's point of view, we can say all the things we want to say, but the reality is if they're just going back to ChatGPT, is that working? Is there any other opinions on that?
I can speak a little bit to that. So in regards, I can speak a little bit. So this is where I think the project-based folks have a huge head start, right? Because they're in the business of delivering an output, right? Not just understanding stuff for the test. So when we deliver content for kids, so we've got public speaking and storytelling ingrained in our curriculum, right? So kids have to go in front of a panel, kids have to go in front of a class, they have to deliver something that they've learned verbally. So you talked a little bit about oral defenses, and for me, that's giant, right? Because if a kid can think, right, even if the output was delivered via AI, right, if they've absorbed that information in such a way that they can present it in a very intellectual, intelligent, storytelling way, for us, that's a huge win, right? So for me, it's, the project-based builds becomes super, super important. But then at the end, what is the output? What is the deliverable? We call it show what you know, right? At the end of the project, in the assessment or whatever. And, if it isn't up to standards, that's okay. We coach the kid. You're missing this part, this part, this part. Go back, redo it, come back and present it again. So I think the deliverable becomes super, super important because it takes, in my opinion, it takes the AI as a partner in the equation, but the student is still delivering something at a high level at the very end.
Thank you, Brian. And I'm sorry.
That's right. Bob, did you want to say something first? For sure. Or
I was just going to move on to the next question, but if you had something to finish a thought on there.
Yeah, well, actually, I was really intrigued by, I saw a comment in the Q&A that I know is also posted in the chat section from Suzanne about, I see our focus on productivity and maximizing time as a part of the issue. And I really just wanted to respond to that and curious to it. So for me, I think that's a really important piece, this idea that we've built a lot of school routines around speed and output. And I think AI amplifies that. And I think that a lot of that comes from broader pressures from around productivity and efficiency that comes from business culture and comes from capitalism. And I really feel like that does not have to be our driver in education. I think it can help illuminate that and help us rethink what we value. And in learning design, we could carve out more time for reflection, revision, deeper thinking, treating process instead of product and outcome as the real work. And that how do we design for depth instead of speed? So I do think that is to me a very significant piece of this, that speed, output, efficiency is such a big driver in how we structure education and learning today. And AI, again, just further amplifies that. But I think it's a really important time for us to potentially step away or use it as a reflection point.
Fantastic. And I saw clapping, I saw snapping. So I think there's some nice agreement there. So thank you. And the reality is this is a wonderful conversation. We could talk all day. I just want to make sure I'm respecting all everyone's time here in terms of looking at topic 3. Helen, if you could put that back up. In terms of equity, access, and algorithmic justice, looking at the digital divide persists, and understanding the cost of this software, that in the latest and greatest versus the free version. I've heard from folks, rural schools lag in AI access, looking at K-12, and on the higher ed side, saying students widely adopting AI, but faculty worry about bias and privacy in institutional systems. So obviously, concerning elements to that issue. So then, will AI, question to our folks here, will AI narrow or widen existing inequities in education? What can schools do in both systems and space to push forward towards justice? Any thoughts? Who would want to take that one on first?
I think I'll chime in a little bit here. I think it's not just AI. I think it's just technology in general. So people, it's not just a rural area, but also in urban centers. And the issue is not just access. I think that the word right there is equity, right? In terms of what type of technology do kids have access to? I think a lot of kids have access to cell phones and that kind of stuff. And the research shows that kids in general will know how to use those to meet their own needs. The same thing for teachers, the same thing for any one of us. But when you use that to engage in really critical thinking and to engage in processes of teaching and learning, it's a whole different kettle of fish, so to speak. And I think from that perspective, the quality of technology, how to use it to teach and to learn with, will lead to more inequities if we don't confront the process, the ways in which we think of engaging in this in more thoughtful, methodical processes in terms of how we engage in teaching and learning and what should we be learning in particular situation and context. I think here, Chris, Howard have all hinted on some of those things in terms of what we should focus on in terms of broad-based knowledge. But I think in terms of how do we prepare kids to teach, teachers to teach and students to learn with technologies and access to types of technologies, I think that's very important. We also see that a lot of universities, the Cal State system has become, I think, maybe the first university system to fully adopt ChatGPT, and there are a lot of other universities that are engaged in the same process of adapting ChatGPT. The question is, how are you going to teach with that? The question is, how do you what's that gap being widened between K-12 and higher education, when higher education is moving lockstep with AI, but K-12 is not ready, and the kind of technological access at K-12 is not there yet. And then you have certain schools, what's his name is here, Brian is here, Alpha Schools, and Ad Astra, it's another type of schools, completely online. There are K-12 schools that are in terms of technological access, they're way ahead of many of the public school systems within the U.S. Right here I'm here in Philadelphia, And here in Philadelphia, you have some schools, charter schools, magnet school. Chris is also here, SLA school. They have great access to certain technologies, but you have some schools that have very little access to technologies and so forth. And so you'll have it will be a inequity in terms of not just access, but in terms of what are the types of technology that kids have access to. And then when they go to college, you'll find a disparity in terms of not what they know, but in terms of how they use technology to engage in deep thinking processes.
Yeah, I just want to echo that, right? I mean, once again, the past is prologue, right? What has the last 20 years of educational technology gotten us in different spaces? You go to Springside Chestnut Hill, right? A very wealthy private school here in Philadelphia. And the technology that they have allows kids to create their maker spaces, their kids are able to network, they're able to create, they're able to research, they're able to do all kinds of amazing things. And in the school district of Philadelphia, most of what we see educational technology is being used to monitor and to drill and kill, right? Achieve 3,000, right? We've figured out a better way. I mean, personalized learning is not what gets called personalized learning on the floor of ISTE, right? And if we don't understand, once again, that like what we have seen technology do as much as anything else is reify inequity, not tear it down. And AI stands to do exactly that. Pam Moran and Ira Sokol talk about what schools need are slack and abundance, right? They need time and space. And I loved the comment, Suzanne, that you made in the chat. We want to make sure kids have time, and we're using the technology to investigate. We're using it to create. We're using it to push our thinking. We're using it to think about this question of what does it mean to be a fully actualized, fully realized citizen? And too often, the way the technologies get used in places of high need are as the latest and greatest version of the textbook and the drill and kill. Fundamentally, right? And this is what we talk about at EduCon every year when we host it. Pedagogy must drive technology, not the other way around, right? That's why when we talk about why project-based learning or inquiry-driven learning, or all of these things of how do we place the community, the student, the questions that we ask together, the problems we want to solve, the things we want to work on. How do we put that at the center? Understanding that all of us, right? Like, let's be honest with ourselves. If there's a tool that allows us to shortcut, many of us will use it, right? Because as much as I love the work that I've done for 20 years on a warm summer day, I'd rather be on the beach too. But we have to put the pedagogy at the center of what we do, not the tech, because 20 years of this work, let alone 50 years of this work, has taught us that if we don't fundamentally change the pedagogy, all the tech will do is reify the inequities that already exist pedagogically across socioeconomic bounds.
Other comments? I'm interested, Brian, from your perspective. Oh, go ahead.
I mean, I wasn't going to add much different. I was going to echo. So I'll just share that one of the terms that comes to mind for me is this intentionality piece that actually I know came up when we all met and spoke before last week. I mean, I think AI has the ability and the potential to do either or both of narrow or widen existing inequities in education, but we need to enter into it with eyes wide open and with intentionality in terms of how we use it and raise people's awareness of what it is doing and what it could be used for or how it is being used. So I just think I keep coming back to that word of intentionality, of clarity of how we're using it and using it with that intentionality.
One thing I was going to ask Brian, in terms of your perspective, you started Alpha Schools as a homeschool in Texas, and I heard you recently speak about going to Drew, and that it's a different type of animal, right? In terms of the conversations that you're having, in terms of the folks that you're trying to attract, there are different. Am I right that there's different socioeconomically in terms of maybe the Drew School folks maybe have more easy access to the technology? Is that accurate or not?
Well, I think it's It's a two-part question because back when Alpha got started back in 2014, it was a lot less technology that exists today. But I do think at Drew University, I mean, there's a huge movement, not just from the K through 12 space, but also from higher ed as well. In regards to, I mean, I've had multiple conversations with the president of Drew University around how do we reinvent higher education around technology. How do we utilize AI tools? So it's interesting to me because a lot of the conversations we're having here, they're also having at the higher level as well. And I think there's a lot of open concepting around how do we use these amazing tools to build a better university, right? So I think they're wide open in terms of using technology, but the challenge then becomes, as to what some of these folks said here, around the equity and access, right? I did a big pilot program out in Fremont, California, where I worked with a public school out there, and the principal of the school gave me 75 students to work with to implement the 2-hour learning program, specifically for math, to catch kids up because they were so far behind with math, and there wasn't an intervention program in place at the school to catch up kids that are behind, right? So I've got a program that can do that. And in order for me to roll that program out, I had to go raise $180,000, right, for equipment and licensing, all this kind of stuff to roll that out for the school. So the challenge then becomes, it's like everybody says, let's just throw more money at schools, but how do we give schools access to capital in a more intelligent fashion, utilizing these unique pilot programs, right? So I was able to work with these kids in Fremont, and there were 9th and 10th grade students that when we assessed them, they came in at 4th grade level, right? The high performers came in at 6th grade level. We were able to use the technology and the licensing to bring these kids up to 2 grade levels in 4 months, right? But it's still not where they need to be. So I think there's a lot of opportunity around these programs around technology and AI and use in these schools, but it's like, how do you coordinate the funding where it goes to where it's needed, in my opinion.
Are there comments on the chat that folks want to talk about here? I see there was back and forth with Adrian there as well. And Curtis Mould says these two ontologies, I didn't say that right, continue to create a K-shaped education experience, charting a path similar to the economy. Informed and ready citizenry is providing the haves along with slack and abundance, and the have-nots and many K-12 publics are relegated to labor force prep, speed, productivity, faster measures. Until the incentive structures for K-12 publics change, the introduction of these technologies will continue to accelerate the pace of the separation between the have and have-nots. Any comments to that? Imagine there's agreement here, but any other comments?
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah. Bob, I have one if we have time.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks. Yeah, this is another great point. I think this speaks to another axis of the equity and access question, which is equity of outcome and how we can prepare students to be empowered citizens who might be stakeholders and those affected by AI. Just this week I heard, I've heard companies say things like, well, the computer said so, the AI said so that's the decision. And just this week I heard something a little different that troubled me. It was I heard someone say, well, that was AI generated, so of course that's incorrect. And this was a statement from from a company to a customer. And so so there's like this shift between, well, we will stand behind this as fact because it says so. Well, the computer can do 2 + 2, so it can also recognize your face, right? And or the computer can recognize your fingerprint, so because it's a face match, we're going to arrest you. And that's just not how it works. But there's I think an assumption that people make, and non-technical people make, that will have real societal impacts if folks aren't empowered to advocate for themselves. But we're also seeing the reverse of that argument, that, oh, no one takes AI seriously. We're not going to stand behind these things that we say, but we're not even going to disclose that they were generated by AI. So, I think there's a bit of a technical aspect there that even non-technical people need to be empowered with, about that AI is just a word guessing machine, and how it uses training data, and where that training data came from, what historical biases are in that training data, and also that it's predictive in nature, so it's not authoritative. Why is it that these systems are even worse at detecting faces of people of color, and in particular women? And how do we move forward from a regulatory perspective to make sure that we have equitable outcomes and voice to the people who may not have this technical background? That's a have and have not question too. And I think that's not going to happen organically. It's certainly not going to happen, thanks to the companies and the providers. I think for all the reasons Chris said earlier, it's sort of that capitalistic model through which these systems have been developed.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the next topic. Topic 4, rethinking time, space, and the architecture of learning. So understanding a lot of our conversation purposefully around curriculum, around pedagogy. So then looking at when we're looking at the environment that we're within, looking at AI enables flexible scheduling and personalized learning, maker spaces and co-planning labs gaining traction. On the K-12 side, higher ed, university experimenting with AI-driven adaptive platforms and hybrid classrooms. Faculty's role shifting to facilitators. All nice things to say. I can't say that from my, at least in the path that I've taken over the last 3 months, talking to over 20 different institutions across the country, that these are nice things to say here. But like I think so many folks are at baby steps. Like there's folks who are advanced because they've drank the Kool-Aid quite a while ago in terms of looking at some of the things that people are just becoming familiar with now. But I think in large part, a lot of folks are just trying to figure out how to protect their students, and many less looking at how does the environment change to accommodate that need, which is understandable. It's just a matter of where we are at this point. So in terms of, I asked this group, part of it's going to be regarding built environment, but not necessarily. So if an AI enables more personalized, asynchronous, and distributed learning, how should we reimagine the architecture of school, time, schedules, and physical space? So should a classroom stay the same, or should a learning environment stay the same, or just an overall campus or building? Or are there changes that should be that may be logical to engage in?
I think we need to question the if statement. I'm not sure that AI enables more personalized, asynchronous, and distributed learning. One of the things that actually was pointed out even by Ethan Malik, who's about as big an AI advocate as there is that right now all of the AI clients are singleton use, right? You can't share, like I can't go to Claude, and I actually encourage folks to use Anthropic as their AI of choice. They are, I think, by far the most ethical of any of the companies. But I can't go to Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT and say, I want to have an AI-assisted meeting or a collaborative space with, the 5 people on this panel. They are one-to-one, which means that they're not a collaborative tool yet in any sort of meaningful way. And I think that, again, one of the things we don't want is to increase the amount of solipsism among kids, right? And I think that communal learning and the classroom, the fundamental shift we need to make in too many spaces still in the classroom is not actually less classroom time. It's changing the focus of the classroom. The classroom is not sit and, stand and deliver anymore and sit and get. The classroom is the place we come together. And that notion that we can create meaningful collaborative spaces where kids can debate, they can discuss, they can build, they can create, they can push themselves to think as a community, right? I am actually less concerned with personalized learning and much more concerned with communal learning. And I think that the promise of the technologies we have, from AI to the internet to Google Docs, is that we can be more collaborative in our spaces. And now schools can be the places where we used to go to school because that's where the teacher was. Now we should be in school, we should be in classrooms because that's where we get to be together. And that fundamentally, AI has not changed at all.
Thank you. James?
Well, this is a topic that I definitely think a lot about, and I really like the point that was just made about questioning the if AI. I think what we're really saying is that personalization, communal learning, student-centered learning, all of these things we've been trying to do for decades now. It doesn't mean, AI doesn't, we should be designing schools because we know those things are important. Those things are what we should strive to have, and that it's goals that we've always had, even before AI. I think we look at AI as another tool, as another thing to okay, now that we have AI, that now we can finally get there, but we can get there. And there's many schools that do amazing work where they have personalized learning. It is asynchronous, it's distributed, it is communal. It's all of those great things that we really want, because really at the goal of a school is to develop at least what I see so many schools say, it's around developing skills. And so I think those are things that we've been trying to do for decades now. I think the challenge is that we use things like AI as excuses. We use space as an excuse. We use time and schedule all as excuses for this. And so we say, well, we need AI to solve this problem for us. We need better spaces. We can't do this in traditional spaces. And I would argue that you can do those things. I think it goes back to a point, again, actually, Chris, you had said this too, about pedagogy drives all of this stuff. And so really it starts with understanding the pedagogy and designing pedagogy around the goals. And so what I see a lot is that we spend a lot of time, or I see a lot of schools spend a lot of time developing a portrait of a graduate or portrait of a learner, their vision statements, and they're all the same. Honestly, when you look at them, they're all pretty much identical. But what they don't spend much time on is the activities and experiences that they're going to do. They just assume teachers are just going to kind of figure this out and follow that. But that's design. That comes from kind of a top level. You got to figure that out, design that system. You can't just expect teachers just to figure that out on their own, especially if they're isolated in a classroom. And so all of these things are designed. And so it's really what I see is this is a design problem, and we need to spend more time really thinking about the activities and experiences that we really want to achieve these goals. And then, yes, you can design space and time schedules, and even use AI to remove those barriers, make it easier to do some of the things, and harder to do the wrong things. But it doesn't guarantee change. That change has to really come from a community. It's got to come from conversations and norms and practices, and all of those things is so much more deeper. And so this is it's a really deep question, but I see it as it's really a design challenge. All of these things are things that we can design.
I just want to second that. I think everything about education is design. None of it is natural. I think everything in education is designed, and it's a matter of what kind of systems that we want to see supporting teaching and learning of people. And I think the issue is that over how long we have natural school spaces, that the existing design has persisted. The physical space, the entire space is set up in such a way. I was not born in America, and a lot of times when I see a lot of the schools in the U.S. in the U.S., I think they look like prisons to me. And so these design spaces, you talk to teachers and you talk to students and ask them what they think about it. They're not necessarily comfortable with it. They don't like it, but it's where they are, and that impacts the mindset in terms of how people think about how they learn and the space that they're learning in. And we know about all the different pipelines, from the school to prison pipeline and so forth. The question is, what do we want the space to look like? And that should be based on what do we want, what type of experience we want people to have in that space. And based on that experience, that then leads to the type of pedagogy that occurs in that space, and then the type of technology that can support the pedagogy to facilitate that experience. And I think we often don't engage in that because that requires big change. And because the system is the way it is right now, we keep on making incremental changes. And then what happens is that every big technology that comes around eventually don't make the kind of change that we expect or that we think it's going to make, because the system as it is that simply absorbs it, and you don't get the change that you're looking for. And so a lot of times, as I think Chris said it, if it's a huge if right there. And I think a lot of times what we really want is more communal, collaborative learning. I've always said that the things that are happening in schools and K-12 and that kind of stuff is counterculture. Outside of the school, you say, okay, we want people to be more collaborative. That's what's required to work. We want to do. But in schools, you're preaching more independence, more autonomy, and that kind of stuff. And so what we have is more cooperative learning, not collaborative learning. And so when you leave school, you have to engage in that learning process again to learn all that kind of stuff, And so to me, it's what's the design space that we want? Because it's all design space. None of it is natural, whether intentional or not. The question is, what do we want that space to look like? And I think that's a philosophical one as well as a social one in terms of social milieu, in terms of what we want.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, like, I think as from an architect standpoint, I think we go to school to learn about the great architects and great buildings, and you never hear, I've asked hundreds of architects this, so did you ever learn whether the client was happy with any of those buildings that you saw, or were the clients able to do what they do better because of the building? And no one could ever say they learned that in school, and many unfortunately don't learn it outside of school. What I found, like I've helped someone teach a course at university level for folks who were trying to get their superintendent certificate, and they wanted the professor wanted me to talk about architecture, and I said, no, I'm not going to talk about architecture. I'm going to talk about how do you deal with an architect, because the reality is so many people think that, the buildings that we have, like, they don't think about, should it be different for what we need? It's a matter of, okay, the architect knows, and they're going to pump out the same building that we've seen since that early picture, with everyone sitting in a row, as opposed to saying, no, go to find out who you are, what you're doing, how do you want to deliver education, and then let the building respond to that. And just too often folks aren't doing the steps that you're all talking about in terms of really understanding who you are, what you're trying to do, and then let the design follow that. Too often it's ass backwards, Quinez.
Yeah, I mean, everyone I feel like is sharing some similar thoughts, and I just read the most recent chat in the entry in the chat from Edward that really resonates as well, because it seems to pull together, again, what I'm hearing as well, that we keep coming back to how connection, collaboration, communication is central. And that's among everyone involved in schooling, the students, the faculty, administrators, staff, anybody. And so for me, when I think about the environment, I think about starting with that as one of our central starting premises. So how do we create spaces that expand opportunities for connection? How do we make spaces that make collaboration more natural and invite social learning, as opposed to ones that, as people have said, like, were built under a more factory model sort of mindset? And so how do we create these flexible multi-use spaces that support those goals of collaboration? I think sounds wonderful. Sorry, I just saw a chat come in. I thought it might have been a response to that. So I'll pause here.
Okay. Any other comments before we move on?
Yeah, I can make a comment from my experience.
Please.
So one of the things that we've done at Drew School and at Alpha School is we've removed traditional based grade levels, right? So there's no first grade, there's no second grade, there's no third grade. Students are operating in these multi-age learning bands, right? And so when you have multi-age children working together, the need for a singular first grade classroom kind of goes away, right? And if you go back to the genesis of Alpha School being a one-room schoolhouse, right? I think for us, that is providing to the best operating element of building community and culture for our program, right? We've got all these students working together with a single goal of learning and moving forward and doing the best they can and working with others and collaborating. And so when we look at what space looks like from my particular situation, in my opinion, right, it's a space where you have a quick breakout session. You have collaborative areas where you have groups of students that can work together. You have quiet areas for testing. You'll also have quiet areas for deep reading. So I think one of the spaces that's done it the best that I've seen. So I was a adjunct professor at Austin Community College in Austin, and I was teaching remedial math. So I worked with students that had dropped out of high school that are coming back 2, 3, 10 years later for their GED, their grade equivalent degree, right? And I was teaching math, and I had to, teach 3 years of math in 8 weeks, and it was tough. But the environment that they had out there is called the Accelerator, and it was 32,000 square feet that they called a learning hub. And then you literally would have 8 to 10 professors teaching their classes along these sections of desks with computers. And then on the side, you had all these breakout areas with whiteboards where students could collaborate. And I think for me, that's what it looks like, and especially in these multi-age, classrooms. And if we look at what, COVID has done to learning, and what I'm seeing through testing is, you might have a 3rd grade student that can do maybe 4th grade math or 5th grade math, but they might be stuck at a 2nd grade reading level, right? So how do you accommodate that particular person? And that's, for us, what's worked really well is operating these multi-age learning bands. And that is an opportunity for deeper collaboration, this wide open workspace. And kind of what I tell everybody, to give an idea, is that basically for us, the best space is what we call we work for education, right? Creating that open learning environment for kids and students and adults to collaborate and work together.
I just want to echo what Brian just said. I think that I put something in the chat that works well. It's very Montessori-like in terms of multi-age, but the ZPD-like approach, but it requires careful monitoring teachers, because you have that differences between chronological age and developmental age when you're within the classroom. So that requires, but that's a very, very effective. But it also requires a lot of direct teaching, direct instruction. I mean,
Chris,
I'm
your
just
head
wondering
almost
if we can avoid using corporate speak in education, and that we work probably is nothing I want to see replicated in education, right? I mean, like, they flamed out horribly and did profound harm to many of the people who trusted them. So Montessori exists, right? To Otis's point, let's learn from education, rather than thinking that what education should do is follow what has been some of the least successful experiments in corporate world, right? WeWork failed miserably.
Right. On that note, what I'd like to do at this point is look at some pathways just to kind of foster conversation that James and I can talk a little bit about, but it would be great to get input from everybody along the way here. Just some images, upper left, just understanding that many people don't have the luxury of redesigning their schools, building new schools. So it's a matter of looking at, there was a lot of talk about collaboration. There's talk about individualized learning. What can happen within existing spaces, to try to, or with minimal changes. It may be furniture solutions. It may be treading as lightly as possible, but still looking at trying to get away from the factory model. Upper, looking at getting out in nature more, and having the lab outside. Upper right, looking at some mindfulness spaces. Lower left, looking at how are there forums for discussion, not just in our schools, but in our society, in terms of just that fear of actually talking to people. It's easier to go back and talk on our phone or on our devices to state maybe a more polarized position. And lower right, just looking at real life experiences. So my own children, or talking to other students in terms of where it just seemed to make so much more sense when it was like a real project they were working on. My son loved business math in high school because it actually made sense to him, that it was actually for something that he could use as opposed to theoretical. in a school like Cristo Rey that is all over the country and successful in terms of getting students out into a work environment one day a week to really get a broader experience, that gets you out of the typical pathway that you might in traditional factory style learning. Looking at obviously technology in the upper left, but like upper right in terms of just taking risks. What, a project that I'm going to show you next, the biggest challenge was getting wasn't the students to try to do a design build project. It was to try to keep the adults from taking control over the project that was supposed to be about student empowerment. So looking at what are those opportunities. Lower left, this is from Science Leadership Academy, in terms of looking at, again, working on real life problems together. Lower middle, like looking at what opportunities, where is there a forum for discussion and debate? Where does that happen? Is that happening in our existing schools? If it's going to happen more, is there different types of spaces that can promote that, as well as just places to get away and be with people? Are there third places that we can find that that we've lost? Where people can get together and feel that they belong, and it's not at home or at work or at school. So this, just briefly, this is a project I did with 6th and 7th graders to design and build a project. The students were the designers and builders, and there was a separate group of students who were the student council who were the client. So it was all about empowerment, taking on projects that bigger than you can imagine that you could do, and then looking at how do you break it down. Starting with simple sketches in the upper left, and getting into each student going through and coming up with a whole bunch of different designs, working together or working individually, and then presenting it to the client, and the client picked something that they thought they liked. I liked a bit of this, don't like that. So these students were working, they were researching, they were discussing their projects, they were presenting them, they were defending their position. Once the client picked one of 30 schemes, and then the students worked together to create something that was that they had to present back in a unified manner to the client, and then actually build it, then work in the shops. This is my son, he's 28 now, but he was on a backhoe. There was a friend of mine right next to him. He was not operating a backhoe totally on his own. But working on real life projects that then were at the front of their school, in terms of, no one believed that 6th and 7th graders did this project that's going to be there for generations, and that is in every photo on the in the yearbook, in terms of not just students, but the teachers as well, in terms of something that these students, I wasn't trying to create designers and builders. It was a matter of looking at how do you take on something much bigger than you think you could do. And you broke it down, you worked at individually with ideas, you worked collaboratively, you presented ideas, and created something really remarkable. This, none of us here were the architects on this. I talked to the folks at Bentley University. They are a business school, and they're renovating a substantial renovation of this building for technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So they're a business school. Would you think that there's maker spaces and whatnot in a business school? It was a matter of looking at how are we promoting innovation and entrepreneurship and working with the local business community. And they were putting their money where their mouth is. This project's under construction right now. It was a firm called DSK Architects who had designed that for them. But it was wonderful in my travels to hear the idea of a $75 million project that is roll up your sleeves. And you would think this is a STEM school, you think this is an engineering school, but it's a business school to really get folks to understand what they're proposing in terms of an innovative project. James, are you going to add along the way here?
Yeah. Sure. So the one point I just want to make with all of this, and I think we've kind of touched on it, and some of the panelists have talked about this, is, I think with school, but if we're thinking about designing school, people only know what they know. And, a lot of people have experienced school as very traditional kind of rows of desks facing teaching walls. And I think school can be so much different. And so part of this process is really to imagine what is really possible. I think what's really important with this work is I don't think any of these images that are being shown are like the definitive answers. I think for any school, it has to be a unique unique to them, unique to their needs. And it really, using that term community and collaboration, I think it's so important that school communities come together to talk about what are the types of spaces that support the activities and experiences that they're trying to create in their school. So things for self-determination and agency, what are those types of spaces look like? And then if you just go ahead and click through. So technological literacies, and I think for all of these, you don't have to speak to each one, so just go ahead and keep clicking through these. But these are just examples of different types of spaces that can support this range of activities and experiences.
Yeah, and in terms of something where you can be together and be separate if necessary, in terms of trying to build community, but then also have that ability to have options to have it specific to what your needs are. Having something like this that crosses over between a number of different things that you might imagine in terms of a makerspace and a food service area, and just having something that anything could happen, as opposed to that's just prescriptive. It's really, like James said, it's not a matter of, okay, here's the answers, but just really just trying to get folks thinking in terms of what are they trying to do? What are they trying to deliver? And how the design could respond to that, if there's a good understanding of what the need is and what the aspirations are.
One of the things too that I find interesting, or in doing this work in designing schools, for instance, this image here with cave spaces, a lot of times there's schools that are designed around these types of ideas and they go unused. So cave spaces like this, or small group rooms, turn into storage spaces. And I think the biggest thing is if, it doesn't mean, the space guarantees change. It can become a catalyst for it. It's possible, but you really have to build community around all of these things. You have to have agreements. You have to come together. The other thing too is when you simply, I've kind of early in my career, I used to ask teachers, okay, like, this is amazing, all these things that you're talking about with 21st century learning, or where things are going, what does that mean? What do you need? And they would say, I just need a bigger classroom and more storage. And so part of that is being able to kind of really imagine and kind of think out of the box with some of these things. And Chris, I see you got your hand raised.
So I also think that architects have to listen to educators in this moment too. I love the idea of cave spaces and collaborations, and we actually tried to build some in the when FSLA moved into its current location. And I asked for something that looked very similar to what this picture is: big glass windows, easy to be lightly monitored by the community, making that space, using glass to make the space a community space. The architects, who will remain nameless,
Wasn't us.
it was not you guys, created these little slit windows because they felt like it was an architectural feature. I was told that it was much more sort of design friendly. And I made the point that, form and function matter, which I felt like architects should have known. And as a result, now the best use of, and also they created the lights in such a way that they were on dimmer switches. So you can imagine in a high school, these are now fabulous makeout spaces. And hard to monitor and hard to sort of keep, like lightly checked on. And so I think this is a space actually where we absolutely can rethink learning spaces, but we also have to remember we are dealing with adolescence and how we design these spaces so that way they can be communal, personal, but also that at the end of the day, if a parent calls me up and says, hey, my kid walked in on two kids making out in one of your cave spaces, that I am still accountable for that. And so my urge to all architects is to really understand that when we design these beautiful spaces, that we do think about how folks are going to walk in them, because otherwise they will do exactly that. They will become closets, and that's the worst use of them. But we got to be smart about how we design them.
Yeah,
well,
great
that's
point.
what
There's
And this is actually at a
There's
higher education level. They have the same concern in terms of making out or worse in that
Oh my
situation.
Yeah, there's definitely bad design, that's for sure. And so that's a really good point. And so, yeah.
Well, and also it's something that Ed Lorden said in terms of like the students need to be on board. And what I find too often is a reticence to involve students in the design process. Because they're smart, they're more creative than most folks who grow older, and they're not afraid to say something different than what everyone else wants to say. And too often people are saying, oh, they're not going to be around by the time the project's done, so we don't get them involved. But we find we get wonderful input from students, and it's not like you're just designing for the students. You have a lot of different stakeholders, but we find that we get some great ideas from them, even to the point where they would probably critique a space just like Chris did, in terms of like, oh, okay, people are just going to be making out there. So it's good to hear from them too. This just in terms of mission integration, kind of telling the story of who you are and what makes you special, which we find helps tell the story and show distinction between institutions, which many times is difficult. Looking at, and we've heard it from folks that I've talked to, heard it from folks here in terms of like having it to be more comfortable and something that is meeting different needs of different students in terms of what works for them, and that it's not one size fits all. Having places that people want to be, that they love to be. Like there was the school design of the 60s where it was like a pie shape that there was no windows a student could look out, and they thought that was success, that students would pay attention to the instructor, and it would work in the opposite direction. And looking at being a kid, still remembering, like my wife's a elementary school teacher, in terms of just like, test, and let's push everything out that the kids really enjoy doing and love doing. And let's push that out and work on the stuff that they hate. It doesn't seem like a great recipe. Being a kid at all ages, in terms of looking at, how's there that opportunity? Where's that third space? Where are those places that people can hang out and get to know each other more in a more relaxed environment? And how many folks do you know who are just scared to be in a situation like this, to talk to each other? And if it's a matter of we're creating spaces that just promote more comfortable collaboration between folks, that and creating wonderful opportunities for young people to become great citizens. This is an example in terms of this is a business school really promoting transparency and collaboration between. I just know that the dean would stand out on the balcony and talk to students who were working together down below, or looking into some different things. And I know there's some concerns some people have in terms of being able to see into different spaces, but it really helped to communicate the culture of this place without having to talk to a admissions counselor. That it was a matter of, you went in, you understood that it was okay to talk to faculty. It was okay to have heated discussion, but in a respectful way in public.
I'm curious to hear from the other panelists if there's anything that you, as you've been kind of seeing these, anything that you see that resonates in the schools that you interact with, of how space has helped or hindered what you guys are trying to do in education.
I think about the NACE competencies when I see these spaces. Those are like ubiquitous interpersonal and professional skills, like communication and collaboration and things like that. And of course, right. But but that's sort of a common theme that I see here. And I'm thinking, those are skill sets that are ubiquitous to the human experience. They have kind of persisted through each of the major industrial revolutions and shifts throughout our history. And I think will be the sort of common I'm afraid I'm going to accidentally say common core. I don't want to say that, but the common set of the common set of skills and foundational interpersonal interactions that we want these spaces to kind of introduce and reinforce. So that's what I'm seeing here, and it kind of draws me back to the conversation we had about what really matters about the student experience. It's these things, and everything else is just tools. And maybe they will play a prominent role, maybe more than we would like it to. But if we can keep these things at the center, keep the students and their interactions at the center, I think we'll have prepared them well to live in a world that coexists with those tools.
I think the one thing, these spaces are all gorgeous, right? I mean, and I think the one thing that I see missing, and this is going to sound strange, is blank walls that aren't yet created, right? One of the things that I think that we need to do is treat our schools as opportunities to be like curated by kids and by their work. So for us, it was that question of like, where were the blank walls that kids would get to design the murals, kids would get to design the installations, kids would get to have their work being permanent, or semi-permanent, because eventually you run out of spaces and repaint over stuff or whatever. But we wanted to make sure that there was always going to be space where the kids that didn't yet live in the space were going to have space to own part of that. So if you come up to our balcony, like our spaces, you see student design murals and student design projects and monitors that are kids wrote the Raspberry Pi code that now allows us to have essentially our own message boards, but designed by kids, run by kids. Where in these spaces are we making sure that we don't overthink the process and make such beautiful spaces that kids don't have the place to own the spaces long after we've finished this initial design process?
Yeah, great point.
I love it. Yeah. I think it's definitely, space can be over designed, and I think a lot of architects, it's I mean, when your job is to design, sometimes you over design, and in schools, like, yeah, you're right. Having that, more of a blank slate can be a very creative space.
And also scary for some folks. Chris, I know you to a certain extent, and I know the bedlam that SLA is in such a positive way. And I have clients who love beige, so that nobody screws up the walls and everything, looks the way it does every day, and you can repaint it with the same paint and whatnot. But excellent point, and I agree. So I just want to wrap up here, looking at I wanted to thank our panel. Just a wonderful group of folks. Loved hearing the discussion. Obviously, we could talk about this for days. And thank you for all the participants. I know some folks had to bail, and a number of people asked for the recording of this event. It's exciting for sure. It's scary as well for sure. But choosing to look at where are there opportunities, even if some of the wonderful things that we're hearing today. It's not just that because AI, we have to change these spaces. It's a matter of there's pedagogy that is working and that a lot of people know, but maybe more people need to know. But is AI something that's getting the conversation going again? Quite honest, there was 80 people who were interested in this event who signed up for it, and but then I know a lot of schedules. It's hard to block out 2 hours. But it was easy to talk to people all over the country about this topic because it's they're scared, which is getting their attention, but then they're also trying to find the positives, which however we get there to have these type of discussions, I think is good. Even if it's something that people will say, okay, I can't give a traditional test. I can't, assess the way we've always assessed. So we have to think something differently. Well, if AI didn't push to kick them in the butt, maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation as widely as we are. So I think that is an exciting aspect. I've heard from folks that they want to hear where we'll share a synopsis of what was talked about today with the larger group and a lot of other folks who couldn't make the event, and also talk about people are asking for what's the next step because they're excited by the conversation. All of us know this is not there's no line in the sand. This is ever changing every day. So having that opportunity for us to keep sharing amongst ourselves as to what's going on and sharing in a more broader sense. Seeing that if we keep this conversation going, and I think Ed Lorden said that earlier, instead of thinking that we have to do this all ourselves, that we have a really wide community here that we can continue to look at learning from each other and helping our students. So we will update folks on any future events. We'll follow up with folks who had interest in others as to continue the discussion, because again, there's so many folks who just don't know that answer. I have had university architects who were on this call and who were interested, who were saying we're not doing anything about how we're responding to changes in pedagogy. So we'd be interested in hearing. So from our standpoint, it's a matter of getting out to look at having those conversations, listening, prodding as to what are you trying to do, not just how do we design a pretty space, like Chris says, that might impress our architecture professors, but may not be the thing that is actually working for our clients and our students. So it's again, thank you, everyone. I think we have more questions and answers coming out of this, and I think that's a good thing. So any other comments before we break from any of our esteemed panelists?
I just want to say that, I think we should design AI with human-centric opportunities. And in particular, I'm talking around students and teachers, amplify humanity by creating systems that foster curiosity, empathy, and responsible agency. I think those are the big things we need to, stuff that gets at interpersonal and intrapersonal skills, stuff that gets that transfer. More distributed cognition framework where you're sharing. It's partners in cognition, as I said before, where it's the human, it's the machine, and it's the community. Those three parts are sort of a triangle. And I think that's a big deal as we go forward. I think Chris said it. You don't want to make the mistakes that we've made in the past, where you simply think this is a silver bullet and it's going to solve all our problems, and we simply put everything on it. Otherwise, that's the fear. We're pondering to fear mongering in that sense, where it's going to come out and it's going to take over the world, where we should be more think of it in terms of partners in cognition and in terms of, how does it enhance what we do as human beings?
Yeah, and that's the thread that I heard through talking to many dozens of people is we're not going to be computers at being computers. So how are we going to be better humans and interact with each other better and learn more and maybe overcome some of the pitfalls that we fell into in the last few decades. So that was encouraging. I loved hearing that, and that was a consistency through so many conversations in terms of and as opposed to okay, let's everyone have VR glasses on and that's going to solve our problems. Thank you again. This was wonderful, and we will follow up the conversation. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and enjoy the holidays.